The air in the professor's office is heavy with the kind of silence that only follows a disappearance. Kurihara-kun hasn't heard from Mitsuomi since graduation, but Professor Koshiro has received something far more final than a check-in. The professor slides a thin envelope across the desk, his voice steady but his eyes hollow. Good. I actually received a letter from him the other day. Kurihara's breath hitches as the first lines of the letter blur before her eyes. It isn't a greeting. It's a eulogy written by a man still drawing breath. The reality of the ink on the page hits her like a physical blow. This is a suicide note. Deep in the mountains, Mitsuomi wanders through a cathedral of ancient trees, his suit looking absurd against the wild green. He's looking for the exit to a life he's finished with, his mind still tethered to the man who taught him how to think, if not how to live. He walks past weathered stone figures, offering silent thanks for the small mercies of his past, a scholarship, a warm meal, the simple joy of learning. He's tidying up the loose ends of his soul before the final knot. Standing before a roadside shrine, Mitsuomi bows his head in a final, polite request. He's lived a life of logic, and even his death is calculated to be of use to someone else. I would like you to become the recipient of my insurance payout. But the universe has a sense of humor. He reaches for his phone to mark his final location, only to find the screen dead and the signal non-existent. Without a GPS pin, his body will just be forest mulch, and the insurance money will never reach the professor. Panic sets in. He didn't come all this way to fail at being useful. If he can just get high enough, just a few bars of signal, his death will mean something. He grabs the rough bark of a massive tree, his business shoes slipping as he scrambles upward. He stops at a massive Shimenawa rope. This isn't just a tree, it's a remnant of a village that time forgot. Standing in the ruins of a place that's already dead, he feels a strange, cold comfort. He leans against the trunk, closing his eyes to the world, ready to let the mountain take him. Then, a rustle of movement. A ladder. A rope. And a girl in a kimono standing on the edge. The despair he felt for himself instantly turns into a desperate need to save another. Logic disappears. There is only the sound of his own blood rushing in his ears as he lunges. He isn't a suicidal salaryman anymore. He's a man refusing to let a child make the same mistake. He tackles her mid-air, both of them tumbling toward the forest floor. They hit the dirt in a chaotic blur of limbs and silk. Mitsuomi takes the brunt of the fall. The wind knocked out of him, his glasses askew as he grips the girl tight. Still dazed, Mitsuomi starts shaking her by the shoulders, his voice cracking with a desperate authority. He's a man who wanted to die 5 minutes ago, now lecturing a stranger on the sanctity of life. Stop and think about what you're doing. The girl doesn't look traumatized, she looks mesmerized. Her eyes sparkle with a light that shouldn't exist in this forgotten forest. She closes the distance between them, her breath warm against his face, as she whispers a title he doesn't recognize. Ukami-sama? Mitsuomi pulls back, his face burning. No, I'm just a worthless salaryman. She leads him toward a small, weathered shrine that looks more like a home than a temple. The air here is different, thicker, older. Aeka moves with a grace that defies her youthful appearance, stepping inside the sacred space as if she owns every inch of the mountain. Aeka settles onto a cushion, her eyes narrowing with a mischievous glint. Mitsuomi is currently face down on the floorboards, offering the most formal apology a man in a rumpled suit can manage. He was trying to save a life. He ended up attacking a girl drying snacks. Aeka can't hold it in anymore. Piffed. Her laughter fills the shrine, bright and jarringly youthful. She points to the ladder and the rope Mitsuomi mistook for a noose. You thought that I was about to hang myself when I was merely drying some sweet potatoes. Mitsuomi wants the floor to open up and swallow him whole. The laughter fades, replaced by a gaze so heavy it feels ancient. She looks like a child, but her presence fills the room like a monarch from a period drama. Mitsuomi realizes he hasn't stumbled upon a runaway, but something far more supernatural. When Mitsuomi asks about her parents, the air in the room suddenly chills. Aeka smiles, but there is no warmth in it, only the weight of centuries. Ah ha 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 ha, parents you say, it must be 800 years since I last saw their faces. She speaks of legends as if they were last week's news, eating the flesh of a mermaid, gaining immortality, and being wed to the god of the mountain. She is a yaobikuni, a woman who has watched 8 centuries of seasons pass from this very spot. Mitsuomi's brain is currently short-circuiting. Relict? Espoused? He's trying to map ancient vocabulary onto the girl in front of him. He puts up a hand, begging for a ceasefire in the information war. Excuse me, please give me a moment. I need to process this information. He tries to summarize. 800 years. Abandoned village. Wife of a mountain god. Current widow. It's a list that shouldn't make sense, yet here she is, nodding along like he's finally passing a very simple quiz. When he asks why she mistook him for her husband, the answer is a heartbreaking shrug. She's been devoted to a divine spirit for centuries, but he was fickle, invisible, and eventually gone. She saw a man reach for her in the woods and hoped, for a second, that her wait was over. His logical mind is screaming, but his academic training kicks in. He remembers Professor Koshiro's voice, never ignore a truth just because science hasn't caught up to it yet. If he looks at her eyes, he can't find a single lie. Mitsuomi straightens his glasses, his face set with a sudden sharp clarity. He is an academic, and the evidence of his own eyes is undeniable. Ignoring the truth just because it can't be explained by modern science is not something an academic should do, is what my professor taught me. Aeka can't help but grin. Aha, how amusing. You are quite a strange man. She bridges the gap between them, her eyes probing his defenses. A man doesn't climb trees in a business suit, deep in a mountain for a casual stroll. Mitsuomi stammers, a terrible liar caught in the spotlight of her ancient gaze. She offers him an exit, a way back to the world of men before nightfall. But then, a shift. She doesn't want him gone just yet. She hands him a heavy basket of sweet potatoes with a cheeky challenge. A man such as you would not require a stool to stand on. Yes? Mitsuomi, suddenly flush with a strange sense of purpose, adjusts his glasses. If you're fine with me. They work in a rhythmic, domestic silence. Mitsuomi hangs the slices high while Aeka watches, warning him about the boars that would devour anything left too close to the ground. After many long months, Mitsuomi's hands are busy with something other than a goodbye note. He finds himself watching her, the way she moves, the way her demeanor clashes with her appearance. She's a living legend sitting on a stone wall, smelling of mountain air and sweet potatoes. His heart, which he thought had flatlined, starts to kick against his ribs. The conversation turns to the ruins around them. Aeka speaks of the abandonment as a gradual fading, the village dying out 150 years ago as the mountain became too harsh to hold people. She's been the only witness to the forest retaking the stone. She describes Magojiru, the last of them, passing away over a century ago. Since then it's just been her and the trees. She says it with a calm that is more devastating than any cry for help. The math is staggering. Mitsuomi has been drowning in his own despair for 3 years, and he thought it was an eternity. Aeka has lived through that pain 50 times over, alone in a silence that never ends. A single tear tracks down Mitsuomi's cheek, catching the light. He isn't crying for his own failed life anymore. He's crying for her. Aeka freezes, her eyes widening in genuine breathless shock. No one has offered her empathy in a century. Are you crying for me? She closes the distance, her face inches from his, her gaze intense and searching. She remembers how he held her when they first met, how he begged her to live. She wonders aloud if a man as kind as him could be the answer to her long wait. In the quiet of the mountain, Mitsuomi feels a truth more profound than any academic text. Looking at Aeka, the darkness in his mind is chased away by a single blinding thought. For the first time in my life, I truly felt that a woman was beautiful. Then the spell breaks. Mitsuomi's brain catches up with his heart and immediately crashes. He realizes what he just thought, what he almost said, and his face turns a shade of red that rivals a sunset. He flails, loses his balance, and goes down in a tangle of limbs. He hits the ground hard, Aeka landing right on top of him. The air is gone again, but this time, it isn't from a tackle. It's from the proximity of a girl who has just rewritten his entire future in a single conversation. They freeze, pinned together on the forest floor. The silence isn't heavy anymore, it's electric. Her eyes are wide, searching his, waiting for the truth he's too terrified to speak. Aeka doesn't let him retreat, she leans in, her voice low and insistent, cutting through his stuttering excuses. She needs to know if he meant it, if he actually saw a future with her. Do you truly mean what you just said? Aeka's face breaks into a radiant, genuine smile. She sees it in his eyes. Even if his mouth is still catching up, the connection is made, the bond acknowledged. If we both feel that way, then our affection is mutual, yes? She stands and turns, her kimono fluttering like a butterfly in the dim light. She gives him a condition, a reason to wake up tomorrow. If I were to become yours, would you stop considering suicide? The gravity of the moment settles between them. She reveals her name, Aeka, and he gives his in return, a formal introduction at the end of a very informal day. Sadai Mitsuomi is no longer just a suicide note in a forest, he's a man with a name and someone who knows it. She takes his hand, her skin warm and undeniably real. The sun sets on the village that time forgot, but for the first time in centuries, someone is staying. The final day of Mitsuomi's old life has just become the first page of something new. Mitsuomi was ready to lose his life, but instead, he's about to lose his mind over a dinner spread. He's staring at a feast that looks like it belongs in a museum, while a girl who claims she's 8 centuries old beams with the pride of a grandmother in his direction. The steam rises, the fish is perfectly grilled, and she leans in with a look that says the suicide watch is officially over. Enjoy and eat up. His hands are shaking, and it's not just because of the beautiful plating. He's been a ghost in his own life for so long that his senses have actually checked out. He looks at this incredible hand-cooked meal and realizes the ultimate tragedy. His mind lost its sense of taste years ago. He's about to eat a masterpiece he won't even be able to flavor. Aeka is practically vibrating with excitement, holding up a fresh harvest like it's a winning lottery ticket. She's watching him like a hawk, waiting for the reaction of a lifetime. He's sweating through his suit, trying to figure out how to explain his deadened palate without breaking her heart. She gestures to the greens with a grin. They are called koshiabura. He takes the first step, lifting the chopsticks like a heavy burden. It doesn't matter if he can't taste it. He has to honor the effort. She tells him about the fields she worked, and the river where the fish was caught. It's a meal born from the very mountain he came to die on, and she's offering it as nourishment for a body he's already tried to abandon. Then she pours the hot zosui over the dried fish, and the steam strikes him with the force of a physical blow. The scent is aggressive, deep, earthy, and undeniably alive. It's breaking through the gray fog in his head. He hasn't even taken a bite, but the air is suddenly thick with a life he thought he'd forgotten how to smell. He takes a sip, and the heat travels down his throat, grounding him in the present. It flashes him back to cold nights and lonely meals. But this isn't that. She's leaning in, watching the steam rise off his face, her voice a soft warning. "'Tis a little hot." He stops thinking. He stops planning his exit. He just drinks. It's as if the world is snapping back into color, one spoonful at a time. The simple, honest taste of the wild harvest is flooding his senses, washing away the numbness he's carried for years. He tilts the bowl back, desperate for every last drop of this unexpected mercy. The salt hits his tongue, and then the tears follow. They hit the rim of the bowl with a quiet pit-pat. He's a grown man in a suit, sobbing over a bowl of soup in the middle of a forest. Aeka freezes, the silence stretching between them until she finally whispers his name. "Sir?" She panics, thinking she burnt his mouth, but he can't find the words to tell her it's his heart that's stinging. He hides his face in his hands, the weight of his survival finally crashing down on him. She softens, realizing this isn't about the temperature. She leans close, a gentle promise in her eyes. "I can make it for you as many times as you want." Mitsuomi realizes he isn't the only one who is starving. It's been a century since anyone sat at Aeka's table. She isn't just being kind, she's relieved. In this forgotten shrine, 2 isolated souls just found a reason to keep the fire going. She's happy because she finally has someone to feed, and he's happy because for the first time, someone wants him to stay. The heavy mood breaks with a sudden burst of energy. Aeka decides a hot meal needs a hot bath to follow. She's practically pushing him out the door, bragging about the mountain's natural spring like a travel agent on a commission. "It's the pride of our village." He walks out into the night, expecting a puddle and finding a miracle. The steam rises into a sky so clear it looks fake, the stars pressing down on the mountain peaks. He came here to find an end, but the world keeps showing him beauty he didn't ask for. The water is perfect. As the heat soaks into his bones, the city and its crushing weight feel like a lifetime away. He catches himself thinking about how delicious the food was and how bright the stars are, simple human thoughts that he'd completely deleted from his internal hard drive. He's starting to remember how to feel. He's right in the middle of a deep existential realization when reality decides to crash the party. He hears a splash, then a voice that makes his heart skip a dozen beats. He turns, his glasses fogging up, as the 800-year-old girl strolls into the water like it's the most natural thing in the world. "Excuse me for intruding." Mitsuomi is currently experiencing a level of panic that modern medicine hasn't even named yet. He's trying to hide behind a cloud of steam while Aeka just sits there, offering him a drink with a casual smile. She's completely unfazed by the situation. "How about a drink while we watch the stars?" He takes the cup just to have something to do with his hands. Then she drops the real question. She doesn't want him to leave. She claims the mountain vegetables are sprouting and it's too much work for her alone. It's a transparent excuse, but he finds himself nodding before he can think. "If you've nowhere else to go, will you not stay and help me for a day or two?" The alcohol hits her like a freight train. One minute she's a dignified ancient widow, the next she's making noises that sound like a deflating balloon. Mitsuomi watches in stunned silence as his mysterious savior turns into a very happy, very intoxicated mountain girl. She's ecstatic, and he's increasingly confused. Suddenly, she's splashing around like a toddler in a kiddie pool. The serene, mystical atmosphere is officially dead, replaced by pure, unadulterated chaos. She's shouting about how happy she is, her hair whipping around as she laughs at the stars. Mitsuomi can only stare, his world-weary brain struggling to process the 180-degree turn. The splashing stops as abruptly as it started. Before he can even tell her to watch out, she's leaning forward, her weight pressing against his chest. She's out cold, a small, content smile on her face. The silence returns to the mountain, but now it's filled with the sound of her steady breathing against him. He looks down at her and feels like an idiot. This wasn't about the labor or the vegetables. She's been alone for so long that she just wanted someone to stay until the morning. He realizes he isn't the only one who is drowning in isolation. He holds her a little closer, the cold night air forgotten in the warmth of another person. He carries her back, her light frame a heavy responsibility in his arms. This was supposed to be a one-way trip, a quiet exit from a world that didn't want him. Now he's as lost as a fallen leaf in a lake, adrift in a life he doesn't recognize. He looks at her sleeping face, the future a complete blank page. What do I do from here? The morning light hits the floorboards before the memory of the night before even registers. Aeka stirs, the heavy fabric of a salaryman's suit jacket sliding against her skin, a coarse, woolly reminder that she isn't alone anymore. She blinks back the fog of the Seiki, finding herself tucked away while the world outside begins to hum. While she slept like a log, Mitsuomi has been fighting a war. A 8-legged, hairy war from the depths of the countryside that's currently benchmarking his sanity from the wall. He's been crouched in the corner for hours, eyes bloodshot, locked in a silent staring contest with a mountain spider the size of a dinner plate. Aeka just tilts her head, completely unimpressed by his urban fragility. "What are you doing?" Out in the woods, the air is crisp enough to bite, but Aeka is practically floating. She remembers the sake was good, but her memory of the trouble she caused is conveniently hazy. Mitsuomi follows a few paces behind, his suit looking more out of place with every step, nodding along because he's too tired to argue with an immortal teenager. She spots something in the brush and darts forward with the energy of a huntress. She holds up a curled, fuzzy sprout like it's a prized jewel, her face lighting up with a genuine, earthy pride that makes the whole 800-year-old god thing feel like a lie. 'Tis a warabi. Mitsuomi, desperate to be a good student of these rugged slopes, takes one look at the ripe plant and decides to go for it. One crunch. Just one. The bitterness hits his tongue like a physical slap, a chemical burn of pure mountain essence that turns his face into a mask of polite agony. He's chewing through the mistake of his life while Aeka watches in genuine horror. She forgot to mention the most important part: warabi is inedible as is. He tries to swallow his pride along with the poison, claiming he can feel the nutrients working. It's a pathetic, corporate lie, but Aeka just giggles, her eyes softening as she realizes it's been a century since she's seen someone do something that's stupid just to be kind. She decides then and there that her new guest is, if nothing else, an interesting man. Then she reaches out, demanding to be hoisted up toward the higher branches. He doesn't think. He just lifts. She's lighter than he expected, almost ethereal. But the heat where his hands meet her waist is terrifyingly real. For a man who came here to disappear, he's never felt more visible than he does right now, acting as a human ladder for an immortal girl. She reaches for the Koshiabora leaves, her fingers dancing through the canopy while he struggles to remember how to breathe. Up there, she looks less like a girl and more like a part of the forest itself. She looks down at him, her smile wide and honest, and the words hit harder than any bitterness ever could. If I did not have you here holding me up, I would not have been able to harvest these fresh leaves up high. Lunch is simple, onigiri and tea on a fallen log. But it feels like a feast. The mountain air makes everything taste sharp and clean, a world away from the vending machine lunches of his old life. He tells her he's full, even though he could eat 10 more just because the quiet atmosphere feels like enough to live on. Then she drops the bomb. No more work, no more foraging. She yawns, a long, lazy sound that signals the end of the day's ambitions. Mitsuomi stares at her, his internal clock screaming about productivity, but she's already decided the schedule. Let us just nap away the afternoon. Before he can protest, she's pulling him down. Her lap is soft, her kimono smelling of sun-dried fabric and mountain herbs. It's a total system failure for Mitsuomi. He's staring at the sky from the most forbidden vantage point imaginable. She looks down at him, her eyes seeing right through the exhaustion he tried to hide. You haven't slept, have you? He tries to close his eyes, but his body is still on city time. He hears the ghosts of angry bosses and the hum of fluorescent lights, a Pavlovian response to the sun being up. Resting isn't a reward, it's a sin he hasn't unlearned yet. His heart is thumping against his ribs, refusing to believe that he's actually allowed to just stop. Then comes her hand, a gentle, steady rhythm against his hair that starts to quiet the noise in his head. She leans over him, her voice a low murmur that commands the world to go away. She isn't just offering a pillow, she's offering her own peace. Think of your body as my own, and slowly relax. She starts to sing, an ancient melody from a time before skyscrapers and spreadsheets. Nennen Kororio. It's the sound of centuries of mothers and widows, a weightless, comforting drift. His glasses, the last barrier between him and this strange reality, slip from his face. For the first time in years, the blackness behind his eyelids isn't a void, it's a harbor. As his breathing levels out, Aeka's expression shifts. She traces the hollows of his cheeks and the dark circles he tried to hide behind a suit and a smile. He is a broken thing she found in the woods, and for all her 800 years, she can't fathom the cruelty of a world that would do this to him. What has happened to a gentle man like you? Aeka leads the way through the brush, her steps lighter than the air itself while Sadai trudges behind in a suit that feels like a lead weight. She looks back with a blush, admitting the shrine might be a bit too intimate for two, before gesturing toward a massive thatched roof structure rising from the clearing. So, Sir may stay the night in this house. The house is a relic, a skeleton of a bygone era that Aeka describes as if the previous tenant just left yesterday, even though he's been gone for a century and a half. She warns him that the futons inside might be hard as stone by now, suggesting a bed of straw as a more merciful alternative for his city-softened bones. Inside, the ceiling vanishes into a labyrinth of heavy, blackened timber beams, held together by nothing but craft and time. It's a cathedral of dust and silence that makes Sadai feel smaller than he ever did in a skyscraper. Aeka looks into the shadows and sees a village that no longer exists, recalling the warmth of 100 people working together to raise these walls. She remembers the food and the laughter, while Sadai can only stare at the empty hearth, realizing he's standing in a ghost story. Lying on the floor, the forest is anything but quiet, filled with the scratching of insects and the hoot of owls. It's a sensory overload for a man used to thin apartment walls where even a sneeze felt like a neighborly dispute, yet this wild noise is strangely liberating. He reaches for his phone out of habit, but the screen stays black, a dead weight in his palm. It didn't just run out of battery, it ran out of purpose. The phone that always dictated how I lived my life has now become nothing more than a slab. He thinks of Professor Koshiro, knowing the man is likely staring at a screen full of unanswered messages and a finalized suicide note. There's a dark, shameful comfort in knowing he's out of range, that the lucky dead phone has finally granted him the silence he craved. Then, the silence curdles. 2 pinpricks of light burn through the blackness of the rafters, unblinking and hungry. Sadai freezes, his heart slamming against his ribs like a trapped bird, convinced that the forest has finally come to collect its due. He backpedals, hands scraping against the floorboards in a desperate search for an exit that isn't there. Then the eyes double, 4 glowing orbs staring down from the dark. This isn't a stray dog or a bear, this is something that doesn't belong in a textbook. A soft glow bleeds into the room as Aeka slides the door open, a paper lantern swinging gently in her hand. She tilts her head, looking at the terrified man trembling on the floor with a calm, curious, that instantly shatters the nightmare. Sadai can barely form her name through his chattering teeth, his face slick with the cold sweat of genuine terror. She steps closer, her voice soft as a falling leaf, asking if he's had a nightmare while she watches the tears he didn't even know he was shedding. He screams for her to run, but Aeka just looks up and sees a mother Mujina and her pup nestled in the beams. She doesn't reach for a weapon. She bows and politely apologizes for the intrusion, informing the animals that this house belongs to the man now. As the animals scurry away into the night, the adrenaline leaves Sadai all at once, leaving him hollow and shaking on his knees. Aeka doesn't lecture him. She simply pulls his head to her chest, her warmth soaking into his skin. "You must have been scared. 'Tis all right now." He clinches her robes, sobbing with a violence that racks his entire body. He came to this forest to die. He was certain he was prepared for the end. So why did a pair of eyes in the dark terrify him so much? The realization hits like a physical blow. He's not ready to go. In an abandoned house, in the middle of the woods where he meant to end his story, Sadai Mitsuomi finally lets himself be held. He cries for the life he lost and the one he's terrified to start, anchored only by the small, immortal girl who refused to let him go. The morning sun doesn't care about your existential crisis. It just shows up and demands you look at it. Sadai kneels by the river, the mountain water so cold it feels like a slap to his corporate-drained soul. He splashes his face, the droplets stinging his skin and washing away the last of last night's salt. For the first time in years, the light hitting his eyes doesn't feel like a punishment. He watches the wildlife, a rabbit, a bird living simply, without a 9-to-5 or a performance review. Aeka watches him with those massive ancient eyes, her tea cooling as he delivers the news of his survival. She tilts her head, echoing the absurdity of the moment with a soft, "What?" He drops to his knees, his posture straight and formal, the ghost of 100 boardroom meetings. He's not begging for his life anymore. He's begging for a place in hers. He looks her in the eye, his glasses catching the light as he makes his pitch. "From today onward, please don't treat me like a guest." Aeka breaks into a smile that could power a small city, joking that she'll work him like a horse. But Sadai isn't laughing. He's looking at his own reflection in the water, seeing a useless fallen leaf that finally found a place to land. If he can't save himself, he'll settle for relieving her loneliness even just by a little. They set out under a wide, uncaring sky. Aeka warns him that mountain life isn't a vacation and the physical labor might be too much for a man from the capital. She looks back with a playful, pitying grin, telling him not to be too disheartened when he hits his limit. Step 1. Water. It's a simple task, but the buckets are heavy and the path is uneven. Aeka expects him to struggle, but he just adjusts his glasses and picks up both buckets like it's a light briefcase. "I'll carry both of them," he says, leaving her standing there with her heart doing a frantic little drum solo. Next up is the laundry, and turns out being a tall salaryman has its perks. He reaches over her head to hang the clothes, his arm brushing her shoulder as he makes it look effortless. He tells her to leave the hard-to-reach spots to him, and Aeka can only stare at his back, her face flushing as red as the setting sun. "I'm in your debt," she whispers, her ancient poise slipping. By the time they're gathering firewood, Aeka's brain is short-circuiting. She's trying to stay dignified, but her heart is thumping like a ringing bell. She trips over a root, a gasp, a stumble, and then he's there. He catches her before she hits the dirt, his hands firm and steady. "Watch out," he calls, his face inches from hers. The air between them is thick enough to choke on. He asks if she's all right, totally oblivious to the internal fire he just started. Aeka can't handle the proximity. She stammers out an apology and bolts toward the house. Sadai stands alone in the woods, wondering if he just offended an immortal because she had to use the restroom. Inside, Aeka is a total wreck, clutching her burning cheeks. It's been 150 years since she last shared her space with someone, and she wasn't prepared for a modern gentleman. He's more manly than she thought, and being treated like a maiden is making her lose every ounce of her goddess-like control. When Sadai returns, he's not just working, he's apologizing to the local raccoons with snacks. He's built like a tank, but has the soul of a kindergarten teacher. Aeka catches his scent, smoke and sweat and something warm, and for a second, she's actually speechless. He smiles, a soft, genuine thing, and offers a simple, "I'm home, I suppose." He doesn't stop at firewood, he's already mastered the traditional stove. Aeka tries to tell him to rest, but he just pushes his glasses up with a grim sort of humor. Compared to the black company that tried to kill him, this isn't work, it's a vacation. He's actually grateful for the labor, because for once, it's for someone who actually cares. He tops it all off by pouring her tea. It's the final blow, between the housework skills he learned from his mother and the service-level perfection drilled into him by corporate Japan. He is a walking weapon of domesticity. Aeka covers her face, weeping at the table. "Could Sir please have mercy on me?" she begs, completely defeated by his kindness. Sadai panics, hands fluttering as he wonders what he did wrong this time. But Aeka looks up through her tears, her heart finally full after a century of silence. "You truly are a good man," she tells him, the words landing with the weight of a decree, and just like that, the salaryman who wanted to die begins a new life in a village that time forgot. He's shaking out the dust of his old life, the rhythm of his chores snapping through the mountain air until he feels it, a hard, square lump hidden in the lining of his suit, a tiny, forgotten cube of survival. Instantly, the silence of the village is swallowed by the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of ozone. The office is a graveyard of monitors and broken spirits, and he's just another ghost haunting a desk. 4:07 a.m., the time when the brain starts to rot and the pixels on the screen begin to vibrate. Mitsuomi's eyes are bloodshot pits, his spine curved under the crushing pressure of a client's demands. Then, a hand on his shoulder, a brief human touch in a room full of machines. His colleague doesn't offer a break, just a small, silver-wrapped mercy. "Good work." The words are dry, a habitual reflex, but they're the only warmth he has left. It was just a promotional leftover from sales, a piece of trash to anyone else, but Mitsuomi stares at it like a holy relic. He thinks he's earned a moment of peace, a quick shower, maybe a second of sleep. But corporate Japan doesn't do endings, only sequels. More work is coming, more deadlines are breathing down his neck, and the chocolate stays in his pocket, a promise of sweetness he never had the time to keep. He'd forgotten it was even there, a tiny souvenir of a life he tried to end. But Aeka has the nose of a predator and the curiosity of a child. She's leaning in, practically vibrating as she catches a scent she hasn't smelled in 800 years. She sniffs the air, her eyes widening as the rich, foreign aroma of cocoa hits her like a physical blow. "Chocolate?" She says the word like a prayer, her eyes shimmering with the weight of the mystery. To an immortal widow, this is alien technology. Mitsuomi peels back the foil, offering the dark little square. It's a week old and a bit smashed, but he holds it out like an offering. "It's sweet and it's good for you." She treats it like a bomb, holding the tiny square with both hands before taking a cautious, trembling nibble. A tiny lick, a quiet crunch, and then the world shifts. Her eyes go wide, her pupils dilating as 8 centuries of tradition collide with high-fructose corn syrup and cocoa solids. It's not food, it's an event. Her entire body stiffens, a pia of pure shock escaping her as the flavor explodes. Total silence. She's frozen, her cheeks puffed out, grappling with a sensation her vocabulary doesn't have words for yet. She's vibrating, her hands clutched to her face, a frantic moo-moo-moo the only sound she can make. Mitsuomi is hovering, hands fluttering in a panic. Aeka-san! He thinks he's accidentally poisoned a goddess. He's practically begging her to spit it out. But then she looks up, her face flushed with a terrifying kind of joy. "It melts," she shouts, her voice thick with wonder. She's gripping his hands, her eyes brimming with tears as the sweetness dissolves against her tongue. She's chewing frantically, desperate to catch every last drop of the magic. One final, deliberate gulp, and it's gone. She looks lost, staring into the middle distance as the fleeting dream of the nectar vanishes. Mitsuomi is still breathless, watching her as she processes the disappearance of the flavor. It melted and disappeared. She says it with a quiet, devastating sincerity. And for once in a long, dark road, Mitsuomi laughs. Not a polite office chuckle, but a genuine chest-deep sound that clears the air. Aeka is mortified, her face turning a deep shade of red as she puffs out her chest. "Sir, what are you laughing about?" she demands, insisting that a goddess's culinary revelation is a serious matter. She's still dazed by the bewitching lump of sweetness, her mind racing with the memory of it. He makes a silent promise. Next time, he'll bring back a mountain of it. Because seeing her like this, watching the stars in her eyes, makes even his worst corporate scars feel like they were worth the price. Even a boring piece of chocolate becomes a priceless treasure when it's for her. But while the mountains are full of smiles, the city doesn't forget its debts. The concrete jungle is still out there, cold and waiting. The clicking of high heels echoes against the pavement as someone approaches the run-down apartment Mitsuomi left behind. A shadow falls across the door, and the air turns frigid. Kurihara stops dead, her breath hitching in her throat. The door isn't just locked, it's a crime scene of resentment. "Thief, return the money, you're dead." The aggressive, black scrawl screams secrets that Mitsuomi never mentioned in his farewell. The past isn't just catching up, it's standing there with a knife. "Sadai-kun," she whispers, the name a plea in the face of a darkness she never saw coming. Back in the mountains, the world is still soft and smelling of home-cooked meals. Aeka slides the door open with a smile, announcing supper's ready, but the response is a hollow silence that chills the air. He was here just a moment ago. The kitchen is still, the fire is low, and the only thing left on the floor is a scrap of paper that looks like a final goodbye. Her hands tremble as she lifts the note. It's the one thing she feared most, a clean break. "Please don't look for me." The words hit with staggering force, sending her racing out into the cold air, heart hammering against her ribs. But then she stops. Hanging on the line, snapping in the wind, is his suit. He didn't run away, he just did his laundry. She rounds the corner, and the mystery of the missing salaryman is solved in the most awkward way possible. There stands Mitsuomi, completely naked, clutching a taxidermy tanuki for dear life. He forgot that when you only own one suit, wash day is a very exposed affair. The silence lasts exactly 1 second before the mountains ring with a deafening "Kia!" After the screaming dies down and the tanuki is safely returned to its corner, the reality of his situation sinks in. He literally has nothing but the clothes on his back. Aeka brushes off her own blush, stepping close with a measuring string. She's not going to let her houseguest live like a hermit while his only pants dry. She tries to sound like the ancient being she claims to be, telling him it's a bit late for modesty. "I have long grown accustomed to seeing a boy's bare body." She says it with the confidence of 8 centuries, but as she reaches around to measure his back, the air between them thickens. He can't see her face, but he can feel the heat radiating off her. The cord loops around him, pulling her into his space. To her, this is just another human life she's watched flicker by, but to him, the proximity is a lightning strike. He tells himself she's seen it all, that he's just a child in her eyes. It doesn't help. If she's 800 years old, then he's nowhere near as mature as he thought he was. She asks him to raise his arms, her small frame moving with a strange, practiced grace. As she ties the string, her fingers brush against his shirt, a touch so light it shouldn't matter. But in this quiet house, every inch of contact feels amplified, a silent conversation happening beneath the surface of his skin. He feels pathetic. A grown man, shaking because a girl is taking his measurements. His heart is pounding like a drum, loud enough that he's sure she can hear it through his ribs. She simply finishes the knot and steps back, satisfied. Good, that will do. She leaves him standing there breathless and utterly bewildered by his own reaction. The sun dips and the house fills with the rhythmic scritch of a needle through cloth. Aeka works by the dim glow of a candle, her brow furrowed in concentration. She hasn't done this in a long time. The clumsy pricks of the needle against her skin don't stop her. From the shadows, Mitsuomi watches, his self-consciousness fading into a quiet, heavy awe. The moon climbs high over the thatched roof. Mitsuomi tries to stay awake, to bear witness to the labor she's putting in for him, but the warmth of the hearth and the steady motion of her hands lull him into a deep, dreamless sleep. He slumps against the wall, a former salaryman finally finding peace in the middle of nowhere. Sunlight filters through the slats, and he starts awake with an apology on his lips. He didn't mean to drift off. Aeka is right there, her eyes tired but soft. She tells him she was worried because he slept so still she couldn't even hear him breathe. It's a strange kind of care, the kind that watches over you while you're at your most vulnerable. Then, she reveals it. A custom-sewn kimono, finished in a single night. 'Tis done. He slips it on and the fit is perfect, not just in size, but in the profound devotion woven into the threads. He looks at himself no longer the suit-clad ghost of the city, but a man who finally has something that belongs only to this place. He can't believe she finished it so fast. Her smile is the only reward she needs, even as she complains about being famished. He snaps into action, the domestic caretaker returning to his post. Yes, of course. He rushes toward the kitchen, the hem of his new clothes fluttering, his heart lighter than it's been in years. Mitsuomi walks away thinking he might be the only one happy enough to dance, but he's wrong. He calls himself an inexperienced child for dreaming she cares that much. But behind him, Aeka is lost in the memory of the night. She remembers the way he looked while he slept, and the way her own breath caught when he finally woke up. She watches him, her fingers tracing the air where he just stood. 800 years should have made her immune to this. Yet her heart is beating wildly over a matter as trivial as a custom-made robe. She's sure he'd be surprised if he knew. This old woman is currently feeling more like a schoolgirl than she'd ever care to admit. She thought it was a waste to sleep when she could watch his peaceful face. It's a secret she'll take to her grave, or at least keep hidden for a few more centuries. For now, there is only the sun, the mountain air, and the quiet joy of a man in a new kimono, and the terrifying racing heat of a heart that finally found a reason to beat again. Aeka's always got a plan, and usually it involves walking. She remembers a business in a cave up ahead, flashing that smile that makes Mitsuomi's logic short-circuit. He's already nodding before he even knows what a cave trip entails. And she just giggles. Please do look forward to it. The mouth of the cave is draped in sacred ropes, a dark maw in the mountainside. Inside, the temperature drops fast, the air turning sharp and damp. Mitsuomi shivers, his hand instinctively reaching for the wall as the light dies behind them. It's not just a hole in the rock, it's a pantry for the divine. Rows of barrels carved into the stone hold the village's history in salt and vinegar. Aeka calls it a natural refrigerator, a place where the seasons don't apply, kept cold by a wind from the inner sanctuary. Then, the stone opens up. A torii gate stands silent in the dark, guarding a subterranean lake. It's the kind of stillness that makes you want to hold your breath, a sanctuary tucked away from the rest of the world. Aeka switches back to housewife mode, pointing out gourds and dried meat for Mitsuomi to haul. She drifts toward a shelf of jars, humming to herself as she reaches for a heavy ceramic jug that's been waiting a long time. Mitsuomi just smiles, happy to be useful. A heavy thud echoes through the chamber, followed by a sharp, high-pitched scream. Mitsuomi drops everything, his heart thundering wildly in his chest as he sprints toward the sound. Aeka-san. The silence that follows is the loudest thing in the cave. He rounds the corner, and the world stops spinning. She's on the floor, surrounded by shattered pottery, and her white robe is soaked in a violent, spreading crimson. It looks like a slaughter. It looks like the end. Aeka-san. He scoops her up, his hands shaking so hard he can barely keep his grip. She's limp, her eyes closed, and that red stain is everywhere. He bursts out of the cave, legs burning as he tears through the brush, a man possessed by a single desperate need to outrun death. Aeka-san. His mind is a strobe light of worst-case scenarios. He needs a doctor. He needs to undo the last 5 minutes. What do I do? What do I do? The logical salaryman is gone, replaced by a raw, bleeding terror that he can't save her. Tears are blurring his vision now. He's thinking about stitches, about hospitals, about the fact that he just found a reason to live, and he's losing her in a mountain forest. He screams it to the trees, Aeka-san might die. She's trying to speak, her small voice lost in his screaming lungs. Finally, she does the only thing she can, she sinks her teeth into his shoulder. The sharp sting of the bite cuts through the hysteria like a cold blade, stopping him dead in his tracks. They tumble into the grass, a messy pile of limbs and blood. Mitsuomi is gasping, staring at her with wide, wet eyes while she just looks at him, perfectly calm. This is sake, sir. Calm yourself, sir. I am entirely unharmed. Night falls, and they're back at the hearth. Mitsuomi takes a sip, the sour grape flavor of the Natsuhei's sake coating his tongue. It's delicious, but every time he looks at the deep red liquid in his cup, he sees that cave floor again. It's a special brew, meant for festivals that haven't happened since she became alone. She served it to him because he's here now, a luxury taken from the offerings. He gratefully accepts, but his heart is still pounding from the phantom terror of the cave. She's already mending his sandals, her fingers moving with a grace that makes his throat tight. She looks at him through her lashes, whispering that she is quite fond of his thoughtfulness. He can only manage a small, broken thank you. The warmth should be enough, but the what if is a poison. He stares into his cup, seeing her broken body in the reflections. If that had been real blood, what could he have actually done? The happy facade is crumbling under the crushing realization of his own helplessness. He realizes the terrifying truth of his new life. He's found something he's too weak to protect. Drinking the wine and eating the jerky is all he can do to push aside the painful thoughts welling up. For now, the fire is warm, but the mountain air has never felt colder.